Hello and welcome back to On the Mic with Mike. I am Mike Jarvis. Without hesitation, my guest today, this time is, pause for effect, Mr. Raja Kadri, a former economic advisor to the government of Montserrat between 2017 and 2019. Mr. Kadri was in Montserrat as economic advisor during that period of the well known by now Mott MacDonald report. Raja and I will be having a pretty broad discussion, not necessarily political, but looking at the development challenges that small economies such as Montserrat are facing, as we all like to say, in this current global environment. Welcome to the podcast, Roger. Great to have you on board.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for having me. It's glad to be back in touch and seeing you, meeting you virtually. So thank you for having me.
Thank you very much indeed for being here. You're no stranger to Montserrat. How have you been since you departed Montserrat?
I'm well. It's been busy. I rejoined the government of Canada. So yes, I've been back. Been good, and still keeping an eye on things globally, from geopolitics to energy, but most importantly, looking at the climate. And
Exactly.
so right now I'm with the Ministry of Infrastructure and Housing. So it has been a busy time.
You know, Roger, I was just preparing for our conversation, and that's what it
Mhm.
is. I mean, the tagline for these conversations is that conversations, not confrontation. And I
Yeah,
was reading an article, a sort of a commentary that you did in the Caribbean News Global back in 2019. Just want to read an extract from it because
sure.
it is so powerful. And you wrote, "Prediction is an occupation of the immature. Describing the future through the past is the task of prophets, and giving a wise counsel to a ruler about what must be done presently to balance the future is the work of a great statesman." I have you somewhere between prophet and statesman, Roger. So,
That's a pretty big cross to carry.
Okay, so well, let's just sort of review your
Sure.
time back in Montserrat, particularly a very critical period at that time, even though we are at another critical period now, and a lot of folks are referring to the crossroad event, calling it a reset moment. But you were there during the presentation of that very comprehensive Mott MacDonald report, which is a report into economic growth strategy and
Mhm.
the delivery plan for Montserrat, which was sort of a follow up to the previous strategic growth plan. Just give us an overview of how these things work and how flexible they are. Can they be adjusted over time to adapt to changing situations?
Sure. So before I talk about that, by the way, it's a great initiative you're carrying on. I think it's important to have a dialogue and talk with different people who are either Montserratians living in Montserrat, outside of Montserrat, or people who just love that country very much, the people. So I think it's a great initiative. And one of the things keep coming up that your viewers and your participants are talking about is the word like crossroads and critical about this upcoming election. Now, it's no secret that all elections are about choices. And moreover, all elections in at least a free and democratic liberal societies have two angles from a critical point of view when we are talking about elections. And that's how one must assess and analyze elections. So there are elections, they become crucial after they happen. So the example will be the UK in 1979, the arrival of Margaret Thatcher. And now some people still think that UK is still living in Thatcher's economic environment.
Mm-hmm.
Canada in 1984, the arrival of former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, It was a very important election, became after because of the US free trade. India in 1971, when Indira Gandhi came in and changed the entire political, economic, and socialist structure of India. And obviously, the US in 2000, when President Bush came in, and then his election. Some people still think what would have happened if Al Gore would have won and then 9/11 happened. So those elections became consequences. But there are other elections that have not happened, but they are very important before they even happen. So upcoming elections in Germany in 2025, same thing in Egypt, of course, United States, Australia, Canada, and Montserrat. Now, why they are so important or critical, as many participants in your podcast have mentioned, the reason is simple. They are critical because the same challenges are percolating over and over. So whatever the issues people like to discuss, from access to economic growth, to relations with the UK, to the climate, if they're still percolating, then I have no doubt that 2029 election will be way more crucial than 2024. So elections on their own are only important if they are dealing with the same issues over and over.
But just following that line of thinking, Raja, if those issues continue to percolate and they sort of remain on the agenda, and it's just like a sort of a circular motion with these things, that suggests to me that the problems that are being highlighted, that everyone knows about and are familiar with, are not being addressed. So the same issues just repeat themselves time after time.
Yeah, absolutely. And as the time goes by with anything, the intensity intensifies.
Right.
The pressure started to rise. Now, obviously, the world post COVID is not the one pre COVID. So all nations, regardless of their size, are facing different sort of challenges, because COVID had sort of done, it was an event which happens like once every 100 years. So obviously, different societies are at a different level of facing challenges. But leaving those black swan events aside, any economy, any society, regardless of its size, if it's continue to face the similar challenges, then every election cycle will become more important and more intensified. So that's what I just gave example, that people are saying. Now, I wasn't there when 2014 elections in Montserrat took place, but I'm sure people were saying that it's a very important election. And the same thing happened in 2019, very important election, very critical. And the same sort of narrative has been happening now. Obviously, it's amplified because a lot of people have a lot more to say. There's a lot of, people have a lot of opinion, ideas. So there are a lot more venues, when people have it today than, let's say, 20 years ago, when there was only radio. ZJB was the only venue, when people didn't have access to phone and podcasts and all this. So the communication apparatus, because of its changing nature, there are a lot more voices coming up to the surface. And it's not only unique to Montserrat, it's happening everywhere in the world. So coming back to...
Okay, sorry, continue, Roger.
Yeah, so coming back to, this will just continue. And in every society, if it's facing the similar challenges and they're not being addressed, or they're not being addressed in a proper way, then every election cycle will just continue to be more critical than the last one.
And in that context, and I refer back to, you spoke about the COVID pandemic and how that impacted global economies and the sort of dynamic shift it forced in economic thinking and outlining economic policies. But in the case of Montserrat, not only did Montserrat have to deal with the COVID crisis as everyone else did,
Mhm.
Montserrat is still dealing with the impact of a devastating volcanic eruption
Mhm.
that, well, yes, it certainly devastated the economy, uh, caused complete social disruption and social dislocation. So Montserrat is still to come back from all of that in terms of putting its infrastructure in place, in terms of rebuilding its economy. But quite interestingly, the plans are there because we're talking about a crossroad moment for Montserrat, and we need to navigate our way out of this. But you were there when, and you were part of the presentation of the plan of action that a lot of
Mhm.
effort went into putting it together. Well, you were part of that. A lot of money was spent on it. So even if it's a template, the template is there. Shouldn't we just be activating that template rather than having discussions around tinkering, not even tinkering around the edges, just talking the same talk?
Yes, absolutely. It's a template, or the plan is not the issue. So there are two things to look at this. So going back to the idea that one of the things COVID made policymakers realize that you cannot build an economy on shaky sectors. So take example for tourism. Now, since 1990, if you were to look at the data from the IMF, from the World Bank, and even from the Caribbean Development Bank and Caribbean Tour Organization, the tourism rate for the Caribbean countries is actually declining. It's not what it was 10 years ago or 20, 30 years ago. It's continued to decline. So tourism is a sector. People have realized it, policymakers, because I do talk to policy leaders in the region.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a consensus has emerged that you are not going to be able to build a sustainable and inclusive economy based on tourism, because it's just numbers are just not there. Now, even you talk about the mass tourism, even that will not increase the living standards. And the stark reality is the climate change, which is impacting the region more so. Like, I always look at this analogy, and I'm going to come back to the economic growth strategies, in broad strokes, but I
Okay.
thought it's important to. So Caribbean is a region, and Canada's north, I find them very similar region for a number of reasons. They are vast. They are at the forefront of the climate battle we as humans are fighting. So glaciers are melting. Canada's north is very big. It's very hard to reach there. The transportation is very difficult. Same thing in the Caribbean that we're still talking about is it's easier to travel from Barbados to New York than, let's say, from Barbados to St. Martin or vice versa, because there's not a lot of volume available, which increases the competition for the air travel.
And then when you
Same
put
thing in Canada's
Montserrat,
north.
and I was about to say, when you put Montserrat into the mix of that example,
Exactly.
yeah.
Because if you were to take, let's say that if Montserrat had an airport which could receive the BA or Virgin. So if you take off from Gatwick, it takes about, give and take, 7 hours to land, give and take, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you leave Ottawa and fly to Canada's north region, it's the same time. So it takes one, because Canada is the second largest country in the world. A lot of people don't realize it. We have 6 time zones, right? So it's
Yeah,
a massive country,
it
and
is. It
Canada's
is.
north is facing the similar challenges in terms of creating the economy,
Mhm.
creating the access, how to get there. It's a big region. So, and the climate is part of it. So tourism cannot bring, which needs to happen. Now, coming back to economic growth strategy, or even the documents before being published. So templates are not the issue. The key feature in every policy decision or a document is the leadership,
Right.
which drives that policy or template. Now, I have a very different view of leadership than conventional wisdom suggests. They are different breed. Leaders are different breed. Why? They have at least an ideal leader. They could foresee the future because they are standing tall. They have this vision how to get there. So if there's a template available, they know how to chart the course to get their people there economically, socially, politically, even though it might require certain difficult decisions to be made. I was listening to one of your podcasts. I'm sorry, I forgot the name of the person who was talking to you. The topic came, I think, about something about implementation and something. I forgot what context.
Okay, no worries.
And the idea about when certain community or communities of people, they are so disheartened, they are beaten down, they see no future. But the leader can change that feeling, can bring this so much positivity to change the course of the nation's history. I mean, you look at Dr. Martin Luther King. I mean, I don't have to tell you what this one individual did for African Americans, to bring that pride. So leaders do that. Same thing with Nelson Mandela. So the critical aspect, if we really want to be honest with ourselves, and again, as I said, with any society, is the leadership. Everything else might follow through this. Everything else is a policy. So if any society wants to address the chronic and core issues of its existence, then it has to come from the leadership, and the collective voice must stand behind the leader. And I think that is the core issue. If you want to talk about in Montserrat's upcoming election or everywhere else elections taking place, especially in these challenging and troubled times where the smaller economies, especially in the region and outside, are facing tremendous amount of challenges. And one particular challenge is the climate change.
Yeah.
I mean, we are in the midst of looking at Milton, and it's incredible. So that's, I would say, is the really core and the most critical aspect.
I do take your point on the issue of leadership. I mean, it's a strong, relevant, and valid point. And we see it happening globally, and it doesn't matter whether the ideology of the leader comes from the right or the left. And I'm not one who goes for, a cult of leadership and, worship the mighty leader and all of that. I'm speaking here of a leader as a manager and as an organizer who can, I said, there are times when difficult, unpopular decision might have to be made, but there is an outcome, there's an end result that would be for the benefit, for the common good. So you're absolutely on target on your point about the leadership. Just want to go back to a little point that you raised there. Well, not little, none of your points are little, they're pretty significant.
You're very kind, Mike. You're very kind.
regarding the issue of tourism. When you spoke about building a sustainable economy, and I'm now refocusing on the Montserrat situation, because in the situation in the rest of the Caribbean, they already have an economy. Occasionally, a hurricane comes by and knocks things out about a little bit, but they build back from that basis because the core structures, whether they be economic policy, infrastructure, marketing, whatever, they're already in place. Montserrat is practically building again from scratch. And not only when you're speaking about the impact of climate change, we also have to deal with the issue of climate change, yes, but also we're dealing not just with a climatological impact, we're dealing with a geological impact as well. So, I mean, it's a double whammy for this little
Yes.
place. So I think that is, or would you agree that that is where the issue of strong, decisive leadership, to borrow something that Theresa May said, where that really comes into play in a situation such as Montserrat's?
Well, absolutely. Now, you talked about the geological uh, fact. So, I mean, people often give example of St. Lucia, which also has volcanoes. But the other great example is Indonesia.
Mm.
It's the largest Muslim country in the world. But the way it has managed its economy by keeping the tradition at the same time joining the global capital system is pretty remarkable. They have been, look, there are certain things in life of either individual or nation you are dealt with. So you have no choice. It's like geography, you don't choose your neighbors, right? Now, some people laugh in Canada, like what would have happened if we would have a different neighbor, but I digress, right?
Mm-hmm.
We only have one neighbor,
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
United States. No, I love so many friends in the US, so I'm just kidding. But in all seriousness, so you can really choose what you're given. So the geological aspect is there. It is the most monitored volcano in the world. So now nobody knows what's going to happen in 20, 30 years. Nobody does. But that should not stop thinking critically what needs to happen, because one of the things most people, all people agree who have either residing in Montserrat, Montserratians outside, or people who love that place, myself included, is that whatever it's happening, it just cannot continue. It just cannot continue. Uh, so then the question becomes, what needs to happen? Uh, there is, it cannot access the capital markets like some other countries. So you cannot access the capital markets. You cannot access the other sources of revenue except investment. So that is a key point. So then devise a strategy in a sense that if this cannot continue, then what needs to happen? So obviously, a renewed or reorientation, or whatever the term one likes to use, to have a relationship with the United Kingdom government. What needs to happen? And this does not include just the funding aspect of it, which is very important, but the overall strategy going forward. So I'm going to give you another example. Mm-hmm. That up until 1980s, Canada did not have a constitution in a sense that we will send our bills to the UK to be passed. And so the current Prime Minister, Father Pierre Trudeau, created the constitution, which allowed the Canadian Parliament to be supreme. And at the same time, what happened is that Canada started to work its relationship with the Indigenous population, which did not exist before. So it was the same sort of relationship where the federal government would just give them money and manage their affairs, but nothing was happening. It was a dreadful situation on the reserves. Comes 1981, Canada gets the new constitution. Canada renews a relationship with the Indigenous population. And that framework was so appealing that after almost 40 years, there still remain challenges economically, but Canada's Indigenous communities are much better off than the one in Australia and New Zealand and the United States. Because the governance framework changed. It was no longer about the crown and you are down there. It became a sort of equal dialogue. So the funding was still coming. Funding still goes to many reserves, but it was done in a way that it allowed the people, obviously enough was provided so they could build their economies. Now, many communities are thriving. They have ownership on the resources because Canada's large resources are under the lands of Indigenous people. So it's a work in progress, but it was a model in a sense that instead of just looking at the economic or social, the governance framework was changed. And it continues to evolve, and that's a good thing. So coming back to that has to be the major part of discussion going forward. So, just giving X amount of money and then whatever, and then the economy just doesn't move. So what is and in a sense that if you were to look at the data of many thriving economies, the government sector does not play a role in terms of creating. It's the private sector. The private sector is the one driving the engines of growth. So that has to be part of it, to how to improve, and that comes with the confidence. So again, coming back to the whole issue of leadership, because the confidence is the key, which develops environment in which the private sector, either locally or internationally, comes and invest.
But looking at it also, again, just picking up from the direction that you've now taken it, which has opened up another field of interesting discussion, one wonders then what is or what could be or what should be the end game. I think the end game would be to make Montserrat better able to ultimately stand on its own feet. Well, if that is indeed the ultimate end game. But unlike Canada, shouldn't really be saying this, but Canada is an independent country. I know that there were some adjustments to the constitution and how you related with Britain and internal relationships with the indigenous community. In the case of Montserrat, Montserrat is a British overseas territory, and the British overseas territory very much in British aid that is almost paternalistic, to put it that way. So how then, with all of the plans and the reports and the consultancies that have been done, do we change the nature of that relationship with the United Kingdom? Because not only have there been local reports in Montserrat and consultancies about what to do and how best to do it, in the UK, at the other end, there have been a series of parliamentary inquiries and reports about broadly, how to change the relationship or improve the relationship with the overseas territories to make them and everybody into one big family. But isn't the Montserrat situation uniquely different when it comes to that?
Yes, indeed it is. But then, in a sense that you look at Cayman Islands and TCI and Anguilla, even though they're not dependent on UK aid, they are still part of. There are certain things they just cannot do. So again, it comes back to the whole idea: is that what should be the nature of the relationship, and that is the key point going forward, because everything else will flow from there. So the aid is just a big part of that, what I call the fundamental reorientation of the relationship. That so history in that sense say, okay, well, it has not worked per se in a sense that you don't need outsiders to see the economic situation in Montserrat. So obviously all those studies which are there, they are there. So again, it comes back to the idea is that when whoever becomes, and I have to say that whoever the next premier is of Montserrat, it's going to be a huge and daunting task. It's a challenging aspect for sure. And that's why it comes back to the whole idea is that it's the internal discussions Montserrat has to have with the UK government, how to move this forward. Because fundamentally, something is just not adding up. It's not like we don't know what the issues are. It's just something is not adding up. So if it's not, the diagnosis So the first step of any sort of, when you go to a doctor, the first thing is just to have a proper diagnosis. And that has to happen, moving this forward. The rest of the policy decision, be that as may access, which is very important, healthcare extremely important. So just to give you an example, let's say you have a thriving economy in Montserrat, and very healthy incomes. But if you don't have a proper healthcare, what is it good for? Now, again, I give example of the Cayman Islands, right? Very thriving economy, very vibrant society, and they have hospitals and all this. But even on some occasion, they still have to medevac people to Florida. The healthcare is a major issue in the Caribbean economy. So all these things have to work tandemly, but they all come from the whole issue of first start at the leadership at the top, and then the discussions with how to move this forward, because obviously whatever this is, as they say, it ain't working. And that is the discussion, vigorous debate has to happen to move the country forward in every aspect.
Well, Roger, this has not been a conversation. It's a lecture. And the same way I listened to you very keenly, I do hope that the people listening to this, and particularly the people in and of Montserrat, will also listen to it, play it back, listen to it again, and absorb the points that you were making. I'm just going to walk away from this with a few quotes from you. Leaders are a different breed, you said.
Yes.
You also said, whatever is happening just cannot continue. And you also said, fundamentally, something is not adding up. On point on every point there. What would be then your sort of departing message for now to Montserrat?
I mean, Montserratians are very resilient people. And now I'm talking my personal experience. I've lived there for 2 years, enjoyed every minute of it. The resilience of Montserratians is just phenomenal. So that itself is an asset. It's something not to be ignored, which tells you that if a strong and clear-eyed visionary leadership is in place, people will follow. And even if their leadership has to make tough decisions, people will stand behind it, because the resiliency aspect really plays a role to move the country forward. So we have to make tough decisions. We have to make cut downs. We have to go through this grind in order to get there where we are. I mean, 30 plus years is of this, as I said, just cannot continue. And if it's not addressed, then, as I started in our conversation, then 2029 election will be way more critical than the 2024. Just more intensity, more intensification. And the people will just leave. Exodus happens for a number of reasons. People will go where the future is. It's not only unique to Montserrat, but it impacts Montserrat differently because of the small size of the population. So even if one person leaves, that person takes away the potential participation in the economy, what they might do. And the young people. I had a lot of dealings with young people when I was there. I mean, the tax savviness of young people in Montserrat is just phenomenal. That's an untapped resource. That's a leadership to really tap into that. I mean, in the digital economy. And I'm just not talking in terms of whatever the programs have been in place. I'm talking about really bring that out, to talk about it, to see what it's been happening, right? So that's one aspect. So don't lose that. Keep that resiliency inside of you, passion. I know sometimes it spills over, but the other good thing I noticed in Montserrat, that after when all said is done, people from different political stripes will, share a beer, eat goat water, and just laugh. And
Exactly.
that was
That in
and I've
itself is an
experienced in
asset.
many bars. I know it was
That's an asset.
so for someone who, because we are like, and that's another unique aspect of, I mean, look at the United States now,
Yeah.
where families are not even talking to each other if one family member supports one or the other. That's another asset which Montserrat has, which ties into the resiliency aspect, because when a nation goes through the trauma which Montserrat went through, it brings a certain type of camaraderie that we have to stick together. So that's another asset. But without a strong leadership, which could convey to the people, this is what we are going to do, and this is what's going to lead up to this one, be that has been included in the reorientation of the relationship with the UK government, with other overseas territories, with the region, moving the country forward. All of these, the people say, yeah, we'll do that. Absolutely.
You just keep making powerful point after powerful and relevant point. And everything there is like it's worth its weight in gold. And you have sort of captured the Montserrat psyche so beautifully in that last part of your presentation there. Because come what may, at the end of the day, it's all up to us. And well, we still get along because we still have to get along.
Absolutely. Again, as I said, I mean, regardless of the size. So yes, United States is a big country, Canada is a big country, UK is a big country. But we know when the divisions go through the core of the societies, it can break up the countries.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what the size is. So if there's a common link which unites people, regardless of the size, they will still come at the top. They will. I believe that. I am very hopeful. I'm very hopeful, and I'm just not saying it now. I have left Montserrat 5 years ago. I still talk to people, after 5 years, and many still joke that I'm honorary Montserratian, which I wear as a
Yes,
badge of
indeed.
honor.
Indeed,
And after
indeed.
went through 2 hurricanes, Cat 5, I'm honorary Caribbean. Now, my love for region started way back when I was 5 years old to watch cricket.
Okay.
Now, I didn't know that one day I'll spend time. So I'm watching. So West Indies was my favorite team, right? I used to get criticized at my school. I was the first child to wear a Western t-shirt, and my friend like, we're not talking to you. And I'm looking at this team and I'm like, what is this? Who are these people? And then I ended up watching a cricket match between England and West Indies in Antigua. Now, I have seen the games before in Lords, and it was a different environment. And when I saw the cricket game there, I said, no, I want to go and watch the game there. That's more like fun. This is where I want to go. And this is exactly what I said when I was brought in the cabinet the first time, uh, when I had to introduce myself to the cabinet. And I told him this, my love for cricket brought me to the region as a whole. I just love it. And Montserrat is such a unique part of that. So, and that goes with the people of all the region. You have to be resilient. You're surrounded by water. You're surrounded by water. You have to stick together. You have to combine resources because uh, you have to, because it's water as beautiful as it is. When I saw the two cats carry Irma and Maria, it can turn into a monster.
Yeah.
So you have no choice but to stick together. So that tells me that whoever becomes the premier on October 25 will have at least have this asset that the people have to move this forward. Now, obviously, I don't need to tell you, I don't need to tell people who listen to your show that the tough decision will have to be made. This is something which is absolutely true, because this just, as I said, this just cannot continue. So those are the words I would say.
Raja Kadri, I thank you very much indeed. Really appreciated this, I'll put it under the heading of this is a must listen. Thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure, Mike. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.